district federal judge rule before the January 1st deadline to register firearms in the state of Illinois as part of the state law? Could they rule before January 1st to block that registration deadline? Looks like that could be the case after a status hearing yesterday in the Southern District of Illinois. Judge Stephen McGlynn hearing from the plaintiffs and from the defense as to the scheduling for oral arguments, and they went ahead and set a December 12th date for those oral arguments. It's going to be virtually. We will, of course, be covering that in some detail, so definitely want to stay with us and click like, subscribe, get the notifications. If you want to support what we're doing each and every weekday morning, you can also check in with the shop below, at least on the YouTube channel, or go to my website, bishoponair.com. But my full-time gig, I'm a reporter for the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network, and I delve deep into all kinds of issues happening at the State House. But here we've got, of course, as we've been tracking day in, day out, the ongoing litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban. January 10th was when Governor J.B. Pritzker enacted the ban, and that included a ban on magazines over the capacity of 10 for rifles and 15 for handguns. Now, all of this also included a registration component, and that registration component is opening October 1st. It's been open for, a month and a half, if not, a good full 7 weeks or so. We're rapidly approaching the 2 full months it's been open, and Illinois State Police had yet to update their latest statistics on who is actually registering their firearms. And we haven't seen this updated since last Tuesday. I think they actually updated it last Monday. But anyway, there's only been 3,439 individuals who've disclosed that they have a banned item. And that disclosure, if you compare that with some of the numbers in as far as FOID card holders, there's 2.4 million FOID card holders. So that only works out to be about 0.14% or so. And you've got a total amount of firearms that have been disclosed at about 6,600, close to. So the registry, at least if you want to look at how many FOID card holders there are compared to how many have actually disclosed they have a banned firearm, again, that's 0.14%. But that shows you that, the registry now 2 weeks, 2 months almost open. The January 1st deadline rapidly approaching, still a lot of litigation on this. There's been questions as to what's going to happen. How is this going to ultimately play out, especially as there's continued challenges? So let's go ahead and review what happened yesterday in the Southern District of Illinois. But before we get there, got to give you that background, all right? So federal firearms licensees of Illinois and other plaintiffs were back in the Southern District yesterday with a status hearing. They were in front of Judge Stephen McGlynn. Preliminary injunction was being requested to block the January 1st deadline. So that was what it was issue, at least the scheduling of the oral arguments was what was at issue in the status hearing yesterday. But if you recall, Judge McGlynn back in late April on the Second Amendment question, he actually issued a preliminary injunction as part of consolidated cases that went to the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. And that 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ultimately did have a ruling where they vacated McGlynn's preliminary injunction against the law on the basis of Second Amendment grounds, on a likelihood that the plaintiffs would succeed on the merits. The 3-panel appeals court said that the state was likely to succeed on the merits and vacated McGlynn's order. So that's still 7th Circuit Court of Appeals had that ruling. That was a 3-judge panel. You've got the plaintiffs in that case requesting the full en banc panel review the case on Second Amendment grounds. So that's still being dealt with the appeals court. But federal firearms licensee, who was, along with other plaintiffs, back in the Southern District on the issue of the gun registration, they had their status hearing yesterday. So that's just the background of where we're at, right? Still stuff going on in the 7th Circuit. A lot of stuff still going on in the 7th Circuit, but you also have in the Southern District questions still arising. And we still have yet to see what happens with the vagueness questions that Thomas Magg had oral arguments on with Judge Stephen McGlynn against the state back in October, if you recall. So you can still search and find some of those details, but still no outcome yet. McGlynn has not issued any kind of ruling in that case. But you have the question around the gun registry and the emergency rules around the registry. And those emergency rules were filed late September by Illinois State Police just before the October 1st opening of the registry. A lot of questions. We've had 3 public hearings with Illinois State Police. A lot of people couldn't hear during some of those public hearings, but state police say they hope to get answers to public questions. We also have the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules that's dealing with all this. So there's no question. There is a lot of moving pieces on all of this. But yesterday, back in the Southern District, Judge Stephen McGlynn had a status hearing with the plaintiffs from the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois and other plaintiffs, plus Christopher Wells, who was there representing Governor J.B. Pritzker. So you had Carl Michel of FFL of Illinois representing them, also Sean Brady and Costas Morris, but also you had Chris Wells represented by Governor Pritzker represented by Chris Wells. Judge McGlynn he started off talking about, quotes, I'd like to give you additional time. If you followed me on Twitter, you can actually see this for yourself. But Judge McGlynn said, I'd like to give you additional time to actually put together the arguments. And he says that he wants oral arguments with a ruling before January 1st. So this is where I think we get into a little speculation as to what could possibly happen here, right? I mean, if you've got the judge who had previously issued a preliminary injunction against the law back in late April, remember that 6-day window where the state was enjoined from enforcing the law before the state got a stay from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals? Well, Judge McGlynn was the one that issued that preliminary injunction from a federal court, from a federal bench, all right, in the district court. So while they're still dealing with the Second Amendment question in the appeals court, McGlynn now has this question of, well, should the registration deadline be suspended while this is dealt with in the courts? So regardless, yesterday's status hearing talked about, the availability of each other. Brady for the plaintiffs didn't expect to bring any witnesses during oral arguments. Again, McGlynn saying that he wanted oral arguments before the January 1st deadline so he can get a ruling in before then. McGlynn said he wants the litigants to make a record because it's very important that the public record and the oral arguments be clear and be, concise. The judge says that he wanted to do it in person at the courthouse in East St. Louis, but some of the plaintiffs and the defense couldn't necessarily be there right away. So what they ultimately went forward with is December 12th. They picked that date after some discussion back and forth at 2:30 p.m. So December 12th, 2:30, that's when the oral arguments are going to be had virtually. So I imagine that since that's going to be virtual, it might be streamed, but not something that you can actually capture or rebroadcast, I think. Might be via phone availability. I'm not too sure, but it apparently is going to be a virtual hearing. So McGlynn said, the judge, oral arguments are very important. It's very important matters, and there's a lot of moving pieces here. The judge went on to talk about how, he has yet to hear a mandate back from the 7th Circuit on the ruling on the Second Amendment issues, right? Because think about that. You've got the judge who issued the preliminary injunction. It was stayed by the appeals court, and then the appeals court heard oral arguments. Regardless of the Supreme Court being asked to intervene, Supreme Court said, the 7th Circuit's doing a rocket docket, so they'll let them do the thing. They heard that case in late June. They sat on an opinion for more than 4 months, and then a handful of weeks ago, they released their opinion, vacating McGlynn's injunction and saying the state had a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. Well, McGlynn, he says that he has yet to get a mandate back from the 7th Circuit, well, because the process isn't done yet. We'll look at some of the other movement in various pieces of legislation, or litigation rather, coming up. But just looking at the time here, I want to get to the crux of what we're dealing with the Southern District case. So the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, they were essentially bringing this issue of the gun registration back to the Southern District. And again, that's what was being dealt with yesterday, not the Second Amendment issues. And even Wells asked for clarification from Judge McGlynn, essentially laying out that, hey, what is this? Is this about the Second Amendment, or should they only be addressing the gun registry? And McGlynn said what's in front of the 7th Circuit is the gun ban case. This is a gun registration case. Two different things, different tests, different approaches that could apply. So McGlynn said that plaintiffs suggested Second Amendment's implicated, at least in part of their argument. But again, this is a gun registration case now back at the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court. So clearly, there's a lot here, and it's going to be fascinating. But December 12th at 2:30, that's on the docket for the case that federal firearms licensees of Illinois have brought forward to challenge the gun registry. And if we look at the latest docket entries from the court, you could see here that the hearing is set December 12th, 2:30. Then you had another entry due to the complexity of the arguments. Motion for preliminary injunction. Defendant's request to exceed the 20-page limit is granted. Defendants need not file a motion requesting to exceed the page limit in connection with their response. So they're going to file some documentation in their arguments against the preliminary injunction motion to hold the January 1st deadline in lieu of some kind of final judgment on the merits of all of this. There you are. There's tons of other stuff going on, including the latest out of the case concerning the federal firearms licensees, industries, gun dealers, gun manufacturers, the liability lawsuit that the state passed. There's been movement there. We'll have to unpack some of that. We've also had other national cases concerning firearm identification cards. So that's another big issue out of Maryland, for instance. There's just been a ton all over the place, and we'll actually review a lot of this and more. So stay tuned. Tons coming up here with Bishop on air. We will connect with Todd Vandermeide next. All right, it's a little late in getting to him, but we'll try to make that connection here in just a moment.